I never told my daughter what I actually kept inside Warehouse 42. When she married a slick, fast-talking gold digger who thought he could outsmart a retired old man, I made sure he would never find the key. But while I was sitting comfortably at home, nursing a glass of 20-year-old bourbon, my warehouse manager called me in a dead panic. "Sir, your son-in-law is here. He has heavy bolt cutters, and he brought 2 armed men." I did not panic. My blood did not run cold. I had been waiting for this exact moment for months. And what I did next brought his entire fabricated world crashing down. I am Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and I spent my entire life building an industrial salvage empire from rust, sweat, and scrap metal. People look at me now and see a quiet, retired widower. They do not see the man who survived 30 brutal years in the cutthroat steel and salvage industry. They do not see the scars beneath my flannel shirts. I had just poured myself a generous measure of bourbon when my encrypted burner phone buzzed. Very few people have that private number. One of them is Hector Morales, my loyal warehouse manager of over 2 decades. I picked it up. Hector did not bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Caldwell, it is happening. Derek is at gate 4. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, feeling the familiar burn of the alcohol slide down my throat, warming the cold knot in my chest. "Is he alone, Hector?" "No, sir," Hector replied, his breath hitching slightly. "He has bolt cutters, and he brought company, 2 large men. They are heavily armed. I can see the glint of handguns tucked into their waistbands." "What are your orders? Do I engage? Do I trigger the silent alarms?" I stood up from my heavy leather chair and walked slowly over to my desk. I picked up my iPad, my calloused fingers tapping the screen to bring up the hidden, high-definition surveillance feed I had secretly installed weeks ago. The screen flickered to life, cutting through the darkness with crisp, military-grade night vision. There he was, my son-in-law, Derek Thorne, the self-proclaimed venture capitalist, the man who wore tailored Italian suits that cost more than my first salvage truck. He was standing in the freezing, ankle-deep mud of an industrial district, gripping a pair of heavy iron bolt cutters, looking entirely out of his element. I watched the heavy rain plaster his perfectly styled hair to his forehead. I saw the desperate, greedy twitch in his jaw. "No, Hector," I said, my voice dead calm. "Do not engage. Do not call the police. I want you to pull all the perimeter guards back. Open the outer blind spots. Give him a clear, unobstructed path to the main loading dock." Hector hesitated for only a fraction of a second. He knew me far too well to question my sanity. "Are you absolutely sure, sir? Those men with him look like serious trouble. They are cartel-level muscle." "I am entirely sure," I replied, resting my hand on a framed photograph of my late wife, Patty. Her smiling eyes seemed to look back at me, silently approving of the vengeance I was about to unleash. "Let him cut the lock, Hector. Let him walk right in. Tonight he digs his own grave, and I want to watch him jump inside." I hung up the phone and set it down. On the glowing screen, Derek was struggling pathetically, with the heavy chain securing the outer chain-link fence. He looked pathetic, a wet rat trying to gnaw its way into a steel trap. He had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him inside that rusted, dilapidated warehouse. He genuinely thought he was about to secure his financial freedom. He thought he had outsmarted a clueless, senile old boomer. As I watched him finally snap the first heavy lock, a cold, hard knot of pure, unadulterated anger tightened in my chest. To understand exactly how we ended up here, with my beloved daughter's husband committing a major federal felony in the dead of night, surrounded by armed thugs, you have to go back exactly 3 months. You have to go back to the exact moment the seed of doubt was planted, the moment I realized a dangerous parasite had attached itself to my family. It was Brooke and Derek's 2nd wedding anniversary. Brooke is my 32-year-old daughter. She is the absolute light of my life, a sweet, trusting, and incredibly hard-working soul who runs her own successful boutique floral design shop. When Patty passed away, I made a silent, unbreakable vow at her graveside that I would protect our daughter from everything from heartbreak, from failure, and most importantly, from greedy, manipulative men who prey on kindness. Brooke had organized a celebratory dinner at an exclusive steakhouse downtown. Derek arrived 15 minutes late, loudly complaining and flashing his expensive watch. He always rubbed me the wrong way, a man made entirely of red flags. But Brooke was completely blinded by his practiced charm. We were halfway through our ribeyes when the conversation took a very strange, calculated turn. Brooke was talking about a new wholesale flower supplier she had found. But Derek was completely distracted. He kept tapping his fork against his water glass, his eyes darting toward me with a hungry, probing intensity. "So, Harrison," Derek said casually, leaning back in his chair and swirling his expensive wine. "I was driving through the industrial park the other day, looking at some commercial real estate for a tech startup I am funding. I happened to pass by one of your old properties, Warehouse 42, I think it is called. I stopped chewing. I did not react outwardly, but internally every single alarm bell began to ring. I have never discussed Warehouse 42 with Derek, nor even with Brooke. There was absolutely no reason for a high-flying venture capitalist to be pulling obscure property records to know it belonged to me. Is that so?" I asked, maintaining a perfectly neutral, slightly confused grandfatherly expression. "Just an old holding property, son. Nothing but dust and rusted pipes. Why do you ask?" Derek smiled. It was a slick, practiced smile that did not reach his cold eyes. "Just curious. It seems like prime real estate if you clear the junk out. A massive footprint, you know, holding on to dead weight like that is bad business, Harrison. Taxes, liabilities. Have you ever thought about liquidating it? I have some developers who would pay top dollar just for the land." I looked at my daughter. Brooke was blissfully unaware of the underlying tension, sipping her champagne and smiling lovingly at her husband. She genuinely thought he was just being helpful. She thought he was the successful, wealthy investor he claimed to be. But my gut, the instinct honed by decades of dealing with scrap metal thieves, corrupt contractors, and greedy businessmen told me otherwise. Why would a man who supposedly manages tens of millions in venture capital care about an abandoned warehouse in the Rust Belt? Why was he digging into my private holdings behind my back? And why, despite his expensive suits and polished exterior, did his eyes look so desperately hungry? I picked up my napkin and wiped my mouth. I let a slow, harmless grandfatherly smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that makes a predator think his prey is completely blind and defenseless. "Well, Derek," I said, keeping my voice light and slightly raspy, "I am just a retired old man. Real estate markets and developer portfolios are a bit over my head these days. I just let it sit there. It is not hurting anyone." I saw a brief flash of satisfaction in Derek's eyes. He thought I was a senile old fool guarding a gold mine. But as I matched his fake smile, I knew my daughter was married to a fraud. I did not know his angle yet, but I was going to tear his facade apart until the ugly truth was exposed. I paid the dinner bill that night without batting an eye. When the waiter brought the folder, Derek did not even make the polite, customary gesture of reaching for his wallet. He simply leaned back, patted his stomach, and praised the quality of the Wagyu beef, completely content to let the old man foot the bill. I handed over my credit card with a warm smile, playing the role of the generous, satisfied father perfectly. But beneath the table, my hands were clenched into tight fists. The answer to my suspicions came knocking on my front door the very next morning at exactly 9 o'clock. I was in the kitchen brewing a pot of dark roast coffee when the doorbell chimed. When I opened the door, I found Derek standing on the porch. He was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit and holding an expensive leather briefcase. Brooke was standing right beside him, holding his arm, looking up at him with a gaze so full of blind admiration it made my stomach turn. "Good morning, Harrison," Derek said, flashing that identical, bright, empty smile from the restaurant. "I hope we are not interrupting your morning routine. I was up half the night working on something important for you." I led them into the living room and offered them a seat. Derek unzipped his briefcase with practiced efficiency. He pulled out a thick, glossy financial portfolio bound in a professional folder and slid it across the coffee table toward me. It looked like the kind of presentation you give to a board of directors, not your retired father-in-law on a Saturday morning. "Harrison, I know we briefly touched on this last night," Derek began, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees to appear earnest and sincere. "But I could not stop thinking about your portfolio. I did some deep diving into the county property records. I hope you do not mind. I just want to look out for the family. You are bleeding money on a dead asset. Harrison, that warehouse is sitting on prime commercial land, but the structure itself is a liability. You are paying commercial taxes on an empty shell. I flipped through the pages slowly, pretending to be overwhelmed by the numbers and the pie charts. He had done his homework, I will give him that. But his math was entirely based on public tax records. He had no idea what was actually going on behind those rusted doors. I have developers in my network right now, Derek said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that bordered on predatory. They are looking for industrial footprints in that exact zip code. I can broker a private sale. I can get that dead weight off your hands by the end of the month and put a massive liquid cash injection directly into your retirement account. You would not have to lift a finger. I will handle all the paperwork. I looked over at Brooke. She squeezed his hand, nodding eagerly. Dad, you have to admit he is making total sense, she said softly. You have worked so hard your entire life. You do not need the stress of managing abandoned properties. Derek is a financial genius. Let him help you. The rage flared up inside me again, hot and sharp. My sweet, trusting daughter was actively helping a parasite try to drain my assets. He had brainwashed her. I wanted to grab him by the collar of his tailored suit and throw him out onto the street. Instead, I forced my shoulders to drop. I let out a long, heavy sigh, acting exactly like the tired, confused old man he needed me to be. Well, Derek, I said, tapping my calloused finger against his glossy report. This is an awful lot to take in. My accountant usually handles these tax forms. I am not too great with all this modern financial jargon. I appreciate the hard work, son, but I am old-fashioned. I never sign anything the same day I read it. Leave the proposal with me. We can talk about it again next weekend. Derek's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His jaw tightened. The impatience leaked out just enough for me to catch it. He needed that money fast. As I walked them to the door, I noticed Derek pause by the entrance to my private study. His eyes darted past the open door, landing squarely on the heavy vintage steel safe bolted to the corner of the room. He stared at it for only 2 seconds, but 2 seconds was all I needed. He was not just going to wait for me to sign his papers. He was looking for another way in. The hunt had officially begun, and I was more than ready to play the game. I let 2 full weeks pass without giving Derek an update, ignoring his calls to let him stew in his own anxiety. That crack finally appeared on a crisp Tuesday morning, right in front of my daughter's flower shop. Brooke owned a beautiful little boutique in the historic district. She had poured her heart, her soul, and every ounce of her savings into that place. It always smelled of fresh eucalyptus, damp potting soil, and blooming lilies. I decided to drop by unannounced, bringing her favorite cinnamon scones from the bakery down the street. I parked my truck a block away and walked toward her storefront, enjoying the brisk morning air. But as I rounded the corner, the picturesque scene of her charming boutique was shattered by the harsh, grinding sound of heavy diesel machinery. A massive, battered tow truck was backed aggressively into the loading zone right behind Brooke's shop. The hydraulic lift was already engaged, whining loudly as it hoisted the front tires of Brooke's custom-painted floral delivery van off the pavement. I quickened my pace, my heart giving a hard thump. Through the large glass windows of the boutique, I saw Brooke. She was standing on the sidewalk, wrapping her cardigan tightly around herself, her shoulders shaking. She was crying. A burly man in a high-visibility vest was standing next to the tow truck, holding a clipboard and looking completely unimpressed by her tears. I rushed forward, dropping the bakery box onto a nearby wrought iron bench. "Brooke, sweetheart, what is going on here?" I asked, wrapping a protective arm around her trembling shoulders. She looked up at me, her mascara slightly smudged beneath her eyes. "Dad, I do not understand," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "He says he is repossessing the van. He says we have missed 3 consecutive lease payments. But that is impossible. Derek handles all the business accounts. He set up the auto pay for the commercial vehicles months ago. There has to be some kind of terrible mistake." I turned my gaze to the man with the clipboard. He had the tired, cynical look of a guy who dealt with people's worst days for a living. I approached him, keeping my tone level but firm. "Excuse me, friend. I think there might be a clerical error here. My daughter owns this business. We can clear this up right now." The repo man did not even blink. "Look, buddy, I just get the work orders, he said, tapping his pen against the metal clip. The leasing company issued the recovery order yesterday afternoon. 3 months delinquent, no response to the warning letters. The grace period is over. I am just here to collect the asset. You want to argue the numbers? Call the bank. I reached into my breast pocket for my checkbook. I was fully prepared to write a check right there, on the hood of his truck, to stop my daughter from crying. But before my hand even unbuttoned my coat, the screech of tires echoed down the street. Derek's leased sports car swerved into the loading zone, mounting the curb aggressively before slamming to a halt. He sprinted toward us. He did not look like the confident venture capitalist who had sat in my living room. He looked like a man running for his life, his hair disheveled and his eyes wild, with frantic energy. Hey, stop right there. Drop that vehicle immediately. Derek shouted, waving his arms as he marched up to the repo man. What the hell do you think you are doing? This is a massive banking error. You are stealing private property. The tow truck driver crossed his arms over his chest. Save the performance, pal. The account is empty. The payments bounced. I am hooking the rear axle and pulling out of here in 2 minutes. Derek pulled a sleek smartphone from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it onto the concrete. He was dialing numbers with frantic, jerky motions. Listen to me very closely, he growled, pacing back and forth in a tight, agitated circle. My wealth management firm handles millions of dollars in liquid assets. My private bank flagged the auto draft as a fraudulent transaction because of a security update. It is a protective hold on the commercial account. That is all. I am transferring the funds from my personal portfolio right now. He shoved the phone against his ear, his jaw clamped so tight the muscles twitched. I watched him closely, letting my protective father persona mask the cold, calculating observation happening behind my eyes. I watched the heavy bead of sweat trace down the side of his neck. I watched the erratic, trembling rhythm of his hands. I saw the way his expensive leather shoes shifted restlessly against the pavement. Brooks stepped forward, reaching out to touch his arm. Derek, what is happening? Why would the bank freeze the account for 3 months without telling us? Derek flinched away from her touch, just for a fraction of a second. But I caught it. It was the physical reaction of a cornered animal. Do not worry about it, Brooke, he snapped, his voice much sharper than the gentle tone he usually reserved for her. I told you it is a technical glitch. The wire transfers got crossed between the offshore holding and the domestic branch. I am fixing it, just let me work. He spent 10 minutes arguing furiously on the phone. Finally, he marched back and shoved the phone into the repo man's face. The driver listened, sighed, and handed it back. Fine, he muttered, looking at Derek with absolute disgust. The agency just confirmed a manual wire transfer. You bought yourself 30 days, buddy. But if that wire bounces back, I am coming straight to your driveway next time. With a loud hiss of releasing pressure, the hydraulic lift lowered Brooks' delivery van back onto the pavement. The tow truck detached its heavy steel hooks and rattled away down the street, leaving a thick cloud of diesel exhaust in its wake. Brooke let out a massive breath, leaning against the side of her van. Oh my God, she whispered, rubbing her temples. That was terrifying, Derek. Are you sure everything is okay with the business account? Derek forced a laugh, running a trembling hand through his ruined hair. He pulled Brooke into a tight hug, kissing the top of her head. Everything is perfectly fine, babe, I promise. Just a stupid clerical error at the bank. You know how these massive institutions operate. The algorithms flag a large transfer, and suddenly everything freezes. I will have my assistant yell at our account manager this afternoon. Brooke smiled, leaning into his chest, entirely comforted by his words. But as Derek looked over her shoulder, his eyes met mine. For one brief, unguarded second, the mask slipped completely. I did not see a wealthy investor looking back at me. I saw pure, unadulterated terror. He quickly plastered his fake, arrogant smile back onto his face and clapped his hands together. Well, crisis averted, he declared, his voice pitching an octave too high. Harrison, good to see you. Sorry for the morning drama. Just the trials and tribulations of high-level corporate banking. Right? Right, I replied smoothly, picking up the bakery box from the bench and handing it to Brooke. High-level corporate banking. I hugged my daughter, kissed her cheek, and told her I would call her later. I walked back to my truck, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I did not start the engine immediately. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Millionaire venture capitalists do not get their wives' delivery vans repossessed over a technical glitch. Men who manage vast portfolios of liquid assets do not shake uncontrollably while trying to wire a few $100s to a collections agency. They do not pace like desperate addicts in a back alley. They do not look at a tow truck driver with absolute, pants-wetting terror as if their life is on the line. Derek Thorne was not experiencing a banking error. He was drowning. He was suffocating under a mountain of debt, scrambling to plug holes in a sinking ship. He had drained Brooke's commercial accounts dry, leaving her completely exposed, completely vulnerable, and totally unaware of the financial ruin creeping up on her. My son-in-law was a desperate, dangerous fraud, and he was currently bleeding my daughter's business to death to keep himself afloat. He needed a massive infusion of cash to save his own skin, which explained exactly why he was suddenly so interested in liquidating my industrial warehouse. He was hunting for a lifeline, and I was going to hand him an anvil. That Friday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brooke on my porch with an overnight bag, looking completely exhausted. Derek stood behind her, gripping a duffel bag, wearing a strained, tightly wound smile. They claimed a plumbing issue had flooded their master bathroom and ruined the carpets in their townhouse. The property management company, Derek explained, needed the weekend to run industrial dehumidifiers. It sounded like a reasonable inconvenience, but I knew better. Millionaires do not pack their bags and flee to their father-in-law's guest room over a burst pipe. They check into a luxury hotel downtown and let their insurance foot the bill. I smiled warmly, stepping aside, offering them the guest suite. I knew exactly why they were here. The plumbing issue was a fabricated excuse. Derek was running out of time. His creditors were circling. The repossession agency was breathing down his neck, and he needed unfettered access to my home to find a lifeline. Having him sleep under my roof felt like inviting a venomous snake into my bed, but I played the gracious host perfectly. I cooked dinner, poured him a glass of scotch, and listened to him boast about phantom investment portfolios. Brooke leaned against his shoulder, entirely blind to the frantic desperation radiating from him. By 10 o'clock, they excused themselves to bed. I waited until I heard the heavy oak door of the guest suite click shut. Then, I retreated to my bedroom, leaving the door open just a crack. I did not sleep. I lay on top of my covers in the dark, fully clothed, listening to the ambient sounds of the house I had lived in for 3 decades. When you spend your life guarding scrapyards filled with valuable copper, you become a very light sleeper. You learn to differentiate between the harmless settling of a foundation and the deliberate footfalls of a trespasser. The house was silent for hours. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight, then 1 o'clock. The neighborhood was dead to the world. And then, at exactly 14 minutes past 2 in the morning, I heard it. It was a subtle, muffled groan of wood. The 4th floorboard in the upstairs hallway, right outside the guest suite, has a distinct squeak if you step squarely on its center. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress and stood up, my bare feet silent against the carpet. I did not turn on any lights. I moved through the shadows of my home with the practiced ease of a man who knows every angle of his territory. I crept down the stairs, my breathing slow and measured. The downstairs hallway was bathed in the pale glow of the moonlight filtering through the high windows. I stopped at the bottom of the staircase, pressing my back against the cool plaster of the wall. Someone was moving around in my private study. The heavy mahogany door to the study was pushed open just a fraction of an inch. A thin beam of pale light sliced through the narrow gap, dancing across the hallway floor. I edged closer, leaning my head forward to peer through the crack. Derek was inside. He was dressed in dark sweatpants and a black t-shirt, holding a small penlight between his teeth. He was kneeling in front of my heavy fireproof filing cabinet, the one positioned directly beneath the framed photograph of Patty. He had bypassed the vintage steel safe in the corner. He must have realized during his first visit that he lacked the tools to crack a mechanical combination lock. Instead, He was focusing on the filing cabinet, utilizing a thin metal tension wrench and a lockpick to manipulate the simple cylinder lock, holding the drawers shut. I watched him work. His breathing was heavy, ragged, echoing in the quiet room. His hands were shaking with a terrifying, unhinged urgency. He was not a professional thief. He was a desperate man backed into a corner, completely devoid of morals or boundaries. The lock gave way with a soft, metallic click. Derek practically ripped the bottom drawer open. He began tearing through the hanging folders, tossing aside utility bills, property deeds, and old tax returns. He was hunting for something specific. He wanted liquid numbers. He wanted to know exactly what I was worth, and how quickly he could get his hands on it. I bumped my elbow against the wall, creating a dull thud. Derek froze instantly. I took a heavy step forward. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice mild and groggy, "what are you doing down here? Is everything all right?" For 3 agonizing seconds, he stared at me, his mind clearly scrambling to process the situation and invent a plausible lie. Then, the slick, manipulative con artist took over. He let out a breathless, forced chuckle and ran a hand through his hair, leaning casually against the filing cabinet to block my view of the open drawer behind his legs. "Harrison," he exhaled, feigning exaggerated relief. "You scared me. I am sorry for sneaking around." I woke up with terrible heartburn. I came downstairs looking for the kitchen and must have gotten turned around in the dark. I smiled, masking my disgust. "Of course, son," I said with fake sympathy. "The kitchen is down the hall. I'll grab some antacids for you." I turned and walked to the kitchen, leaving him alone for just a few seconds. When I returned and handed him the chalky tablets, he thanked me profusely, wishing me a good night before hurrying back upstairs. I waited until his footsteps faded completely. Then I walked back into my study. He had closed the cabinet drawer, but in his blind panic, he had made a careless mistake. I pulled the drawer open and looked inside. The folder detailing my total net worth and liquid cash reserves was pulled halfway up, sticking out awkwardly from the rest of the meticulously organized files. He had found exactly what he was looking for. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen, casually flipping through the newspaper. Brooke came downstairs first, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and kissed my cheek. Derek followed shortly after, looking surprisingly refreshed for a man who had spent the early hours of the morning picking the lock on a filing cabinet. He greeted me with hollow enthusiasm, pouring cereal and chatting about the weather. I played the gracious host, offering a warm smile and asking if his heartburn had settled down. He assured me it had, completely oblivious to what I actually knew. But I needed irrefutable proof. A displaced file folder was not enough to condemn him in Brooke's eyes. I needed him caught in the act. After breakfast, Brooke mentioned she needed a shower before a meeting. Derek said he was going to read in the living room. It was the perfect opportunity. I casually told them I was going for a walk. As I passed through the living room, I pulled my iPad from my briefcase. I unlocked the screen, leaving the auto-lock disabled. I opened my email and pulled up a carefully fabricated message I had created the night prior. It looked like confidential correspondence from my wealth management bank. The subject read, "Urgent portfolio liquidation." The body detailed a fictional impending transfer of $7 million into a highly liquid checking account. It was the ultimate prize for a drowning man. I placed the unlocked iPad on the coffee table next to Derek. I called out a cheerful goodbye and walked out the front door. I did not go for a walk. I went to my truck and immediately opened the secure application linked to the hidden cameras. The live feed buffered into crystal clear focus. I stared at the screen, watching the silent movie play out. Derek waited 2 minutes to ensure I was gone, and Brooke was in the shower. He lowered his magazine, his head snapped toward the coffee table, his eyes locking onto my iPad as if it were solid gold bullion. The internal debate lasted only seconds. The lure of the fabricated email was too strong to resist. He cast a paranoid glance over his shoulder toward the stairs, then snatched the iPad off the table. The hidden camera captured his face with agonizing clarity. The polished mask vanished, replaced by the feral expression of a scavenger. I watched his jaw drop as he read the fake email. $7 million in liquid cash, the exact lifeline he needed. He immediately pulled his own smartphone from his pocket. His hands were shaking violently. He began snapping pictures of the iPad screen, capturing the fake account numbers and routing details. His greed was in complete control. I watched in cold disgust as he closed the email application and began frantically swiping through my private device. He opened my digital banking apps, my investment portfolios, and my personal text messages. He was searching for passwords, security questions, anything he could use to drain my assets dry. He photographed every single screen. He was moving with a terrifying, unhinged speed, his thumbs flying across the glass. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was not a banking error, and it was certainly not a concerned son-in-law trying to protect his family. The plausible lie was utterly dead. I was watching a calculated, predatory invasion of privacy. I was watching a thief meticulously planning the destruction of my life's work. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until the leather creaked. I felt a deep sorrow for Brooke. She was upstairs washing her hair, completely oblivious to the fact that the man she loved was actively trying to rob her father blind. Derek thought he had hit the ultimate jackpot. He had no idea that every frantic swipe was being recorded and stored on a secure cloud server, building an impenetrable wall of evidence against him. After 5 minutes of frantic digital pillaging, the sound of the upstairs shower must have shut off. Derek froze, his head snapped up. He hastily closed all the applications on the iPad, returning it to the exact screen and position where I had left it. He dropped his phone back into his pocket, picked up his magazine, and leaned back against the sofa cushions, crossing his legs in a picture of relaxed leisure. He wiped a bead of nervous sweat from his brow, his eyes darting one last time toward the stairs, just to be absolutely certain he was safe. He took a deep breath, smoothing his hair and adjusting his collar, instantly transforming back into the perfect, supportive husband. I closed the application on my phone, plunging the screen into darkness. The silence inside my truck was absolute. I sat there for a few moments, letting the cold reality settle deep into my bones. The hunt was over, the trap had sprung, and the rat was caught. I would not let him take away the life that Patty and I had built. I now possessed the exact leverage I needed to completely destroy Derek Thorne and sever his parasitic hold on my daughter. The morning after I watched my son-in-law try to steal my digital identity, I told Brooke and Derek I was going to the store. Instead, I drove my truck to a faded diner on the edge of town. I slid into a corner booth. 10 minutes later, Thomas pulled into the parking lot. He was a private investigator I had retained decades ago. He was a quiet man who possessed a talent for finding the dirt people buried deep underground. He slid into the booth across from me, placing a thick manila folder on the scratched Formica table. He did not bother with pleasantries. He just ordered a black coffee and looked at me with grim, tired eyes. "You were right to trust your gut on this one, Harrison," Thomas said. I dug into Derek Thorne and his wealth management firm. The entire operation is a facade constructed of smoke and mirrors. Thorne Venture Capital does not exist. It is a rented post office box inside a shipping center. There is no corporate office. There is no massive portfolio of liquid assets. He has not filed a legitimate corporate tax return in over 3 years. I felt my jaw tighten. How did he manage to fool Brooke? Thomas slid another piece of paper toward me. 2 years ago, Derek actually had some money. He received a decent inheritance from his late grandfather. He poured every single penny of it into a massive cryptocurrency scheme. He thought he was going to become a billionaire overnight. Instead, the platform collapsed. He lost his entire inheritance in the span of 48 hours. My stomach twisted into a heavy knot. "He lost everything, worse than everything," Thomas corrected, leaning forward. "When he lost his inheritance, he tried to chase his losses. He started borrowing money to buy back into the market. When the legitimate banks cut him off, he went to the shadow lenders. He currently owes just over $2 million to a very dangerous loan shark syndicate operating out of Chicago." I stared at the red numbers. The puzzle pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. The desperate pacing in the alleyway, the frantic attempt to break into my filing cabinet, and the joy on his face when he saw the fake email detailing a $7 million transfer. Derek was a dead man walking. The people he owed money to did not send angry letters. They sent men to break legs and burn down houses. "There is more, Harrison," Thomas said softly, pushing a final stack of papers across the table. I pulled the financial records for your daughter's shop. When they got married, Derek convinced Brooke to let him handle the accounting. He told her it would take the stress off her shoulders. But he has been systematically draining her accounts. He stopped paying her commercial leases 3 months ago. That is why her delivery van was repossessed yesterday. By the end of this month, the bank will freeze her accounts, and she will be forced into bankruptcy. The air in my lungs turned to ash. Brooke had built that boutique from nothing. It was her dream, her pride and joy, and her husband was bleeding it dry behind her back to save his own miserable life. He is using her as a human shield, I whispered, my voice sounding rough. He is drowning, Harrison, Thomas said, and when a man like Derek starts to drown, he will pull down whoever is closest to him just to get another breath of air. He targeted you because you are his last resort. He needs a massive payout right now. If he does not get it, those loan sharks will come. I reached out and placed my hand over the manila folder. I felt a sudden profound calm wash over me. Thank you, Thomas, I said, sliding the folder into my briefcase. You did exceptional work. What are you going to do, Harrison? Thomas asked. We can have him arrested for fraud before the end of the week. I shook my head slowly, finishing my coffee. No, the authorities would just put him in a cell. That is too easy. I need her to see exactly who he is. I pulled out of the diner parking lot and drove straight to the downtown business district. I parked in the underground garage of a sleek glass high-rise and took the private elevator up to the 14th floor to see Mitchell Gallagher, my corporate attorney for over 25 years. Mitchell was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who believed in the absolute power of an ironclad contract. I placed the manila folder on his desk and played the iPad footage of Derek, photographing my fake banking details. Mitchell watched the entire video, his professional composure slowly cracking until his eyes narrowed in sheer disbelief. Harrison, this is absolutely catastrophic, Mitchell said, reaching for his desk phone. This man is not just a fraud. He is actively committing grand larceny against your daughter. I am calling the Financial Crimes Division right now. We hand over this folder, we hand over the video, and they will have Derek in handcuffs before dinner. Put the phone down, Mitchell, I said, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a razor. Mitchell froze. Harrison, did you not hear a word I just said? The man owes $2 million to literal loan sharks. We have to bring the police into this immediately. I leaned forward. If we call the police right now, we lose everything. You are a lawyer, Mitchell. You look at this through the rigid lens of a courtroom. I am looking at this through the eyes of a father. Derek has spent 2 entire years grooming her, isolating her, and convincing her that he is the perfect husband. If the police drag him away, he will spin a story so fast it will make your head spin. He will play the absolute victim. He will convince her that her paranoid, controlling father framed him simply to ruin their marriage. She would defend him to her last breath. Mitchell slowly lowered his hand from the receiver. She would absolutely defend him, he murmured. I cannot afford a partial victory, I said. I am going to build an inescapable trap. Brooke needs to see his monstrosity with her own eyes. I left Mitchell's office and drove straight to my primary salvage yard. I sat in the dusty back office with Hector Morales, my warehouse manager. I pulled out a stack of blank, official company letterheads, watermarked with our original logo. I need us to manufacture a lie, Hector, I said. I need an inventory manifest that looks so highly classified, so undeniably lucrative, that a desperate man would risk federal prison to get his hands on it. Platinum and pure rhodium, the most untraceable, high-yield salvage materials on the market. We list the storage location as Warehouse 42. Hector printed the final document using the old dot matrix printer. The faded ink gave the manifest an aged, deeply confidential appearance. I took a red ink stamp and slammed it across the top margin. Highly confidential, eyes only. We placed the total value at $15 million. I slid the documents into a worn manila envelope. I drove back home. The house was empty. I walked into my private study, pulled open the bottom drawer of the fireproof filing cabinet Derek had previously picked open, and wedged the thick manila envelope halfway down between my legitimate tax returns and my original property deeds. I left the red confidential stamp slightly exposed. It was an irresistible beacon for a man searching for salvation. I left the study door cracked open exactly an inch and a half. The psychological lure was set. I spent the remainder of the long evening playing the difficult role of the comforting, utterly oblivious father. When Brooke and Derek returned from the boutique, they looked utterly exhausted. Brooke's eyes were red from crying, and Derek maintained a facade of furious, righteous indignation about the incompetent banking system, holding their funds hostage. I made dinner, offered encouraging words, and watched him perform. He was a spectacular liar, kissing my daughter's forehead and promising her that everything would be resolved by Monday. But beneath the glass table, his right knee bounced continuously with an erratic, wildly uncontrollable tremor. The $2 million syndicate debt was eating him alive from the inside out. He was running out of time, running out of lies, and running out of money. He needed a miracle. At exactly 10:30, they politely excused themselves to the guest suite. I retreated to my bedroom, leaving my door open just a fraction. I lay down on the mattress, fully clothed, holding my phone in the palm of my hand. The screen was dark, but the camera application was primed and ready. I did not have to wait until 2 in the morning this time. The desperation was accelerating. At exactly midnight, the floorboard in the upstairs hallway groaned. The soft padding sound of footsteps descended the staircase. I raised my phone, unlocking the screen, and tapped the live feed icon. The digital clock camera in the study flickered to life. The heavy mahogany door slowly, silently pushed open, casting a long shadow across the carpet. Derek Thorne stepped into the room, swallowed the bait, and sealed his own fate. The morning after, Derek broke into my study and stole the contents of the manila envelope. The atmosphere in the house was thick with an unspoken tension. At breakfast, Derek was practically vibrating with a manic, poorly concealed energy. He drank his coffee too fast, his eyes darting around the room, completely unable to sit still. He told Brooke they needed to head back to their townhouse, claiming the property management company had finally cleared the plumbing issue. Brooke looked relieved, completely unaware that her husband was actually rushing to execute a phantom heist. I helped them carry their bags to the driveway, playing the role of the sad, lonely father saying goodbye to his beloved daughter. I hugged Brooke tightly, resting my chin on top of her head. Then I turned to Derek. I shook his hand, wishing him luck with his venture capital meetings. As I handed him his heavy leather briefcase, my thumb brushed against the hidden magnetic lining of the side pocket. Earlier that morning, while he was in the shower washing off the sweat of his midnight burglary, I had slipped a tiny state-of-the-art listening device deep into the seams of the leather. It was barely the size of a coin, equipped with a long-lasting battery and a cellular transmitter. I watched them pull out of the driveway, the taillights of his leased sports car fading into the distance. I did not go back inside the house. I walked straight to my old truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the secure audio application. The digital interface hummed to life, connecting to the transmitter buried in Derek's briefcase. For the first 20 minutes, I heard nothing but the ambient noise of the highway and the soft murmur of the radio. Then, I heard the distinct sound of the passenger door opening and closing. He had dropped Brooke off at her flower shop. The moment she was out of the car, the entire audio landscape shifted. The radio was abruptly turned off. I could hear Derek breathing. It was heavy, ragged, and frantic, the sound of a man running out of oxygen. I heard the aggressive squeal of tires as he accelerated, driving erratically. A few minutes later, the car came to a sudden halt. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the headrest of my truck, and listened. I heard the rapid, erratic tapping of a phone keypad. The line rang 3 times before a voice answered. It was a low, gravelly voice, entirely devoid of warmth or professional courtesy. The voice simply said one word, speaking his name. Derek exhaled a shaky breath, his voice pitching high with an edge of absolute desperation. "Listen to me," he pleaded, the words spilling out of his mouth in a frantic rush. "I know the payment is late. I know we are past the grace period. But you have to listen to me right now. I just found the ultimate score. I am talking about $15 million in unregistered, untraceable industrial platinum." The line went dead silent for a moment. "Explain," the loan shark commanded, his tone suddenly sharp and attentive. Derek swallowed hard. My father-in-law, he is an old scrap metal hoarder. I got into his private study last night. I found his confidential holding manifests. He has a massive cache of pure platinum and rhodium sitting in a secure facility right outside the city limits. Warehouse 42. I saw the official paperwork with my own eyes. It is completely off the grid. Are you telling me this old man is sitting on 15 million in raw metal and you can get to it? The loan shark asked, a predatory edge creeping into his voice. I can get you full access, Derek insisted. Give me 3 days, just give me 72 hours. I will get the keys to the warehouse. I will give you the exact coordinates, the security codes, and the layout. You send your crew in with transport trucks, and you take the entire stockpile. You take your 2 million, you take an extra million for the trouble, and I keep the rest. It is a clean, untraceable ghost job, 3 days. The loan shark finally agreed, his voice cold and menacing. You have 72 hours to deliver the warehouse access. If you are lying to us, Thorne, we are not just going to break your legs. We are going to take your wife. We know where her little boutique is. We will take her, and we will make you watch what happens when you cross us. The air in my lungs turned to jagged glass. My heart hammered furiously against my ribs. I waited for Derek to defend his wife. I waited for him to tell the loan shark to leave Brooke out of this, to show a single shred of human decency. Derek let out a cold, cynical laugh. You can do whatever you want with her, he said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Give me the 3 days. I will get you the platinum, take your cut, and I am taking my share and catching the first flight to Dubai. I lowered my phone, letting the screen fade to black as the chilling echo of Derek's final sentence hung in the heavy air of my truck. He was perfectly willing to hand Brooke over to violent, merciless loan sharks just to buy himself enough time to flee the country. A cold, dark fury wrapped around my heart, squeezing until my chest ached. He had sealed his own fate with those callous words. Derek thought he possessed the upper hand. He genuinely believed he had outsmarted a clueless old scrap metal hoarder. He believed he was coordinating the perfect, untraceable heist. But Derek was a fool. He had no idea what Warehouse 42 actually represented. There was absolutely no scrap metal stored in that building. There was no secret stockpile of unregistered industrial platinum. The manifest I had left exposed in my study was a pure, unadulterated work of fiction. Exactly 5 years ago, the Industrial Zoning Board had quietly approached me with a highly lucrative, completely confidential proposition. Warehouse 42 was isolated, positioned at the very end of a dead-end service road flanked by dense concrete barriers. I had leased the entire structure and the surrounding 3 acres to Federal Armored Transport. They are the premier logistics contractors, responsible for managing and moving immense volumes of physical currency for the central banking system. From the outside, the facility looks exactly like a forgotten relic of a bygone industrial era. It is a masterpiece of urban camouflage designed to make people look away. But the interior is an entirely different reality. Behind those rusted steel doors lies a heavily fortified, military-grade staging ground. The building is wired with a network of silent federal alarms that link directly to the Regional Law Enforcement Dispatch and the Federal Bureau. The main floor is crisscrossed with invisible motion lasers. Furthermore, there is a permanent tactical unit of highly trained, heavily armed federal guards stationed inside the control room 24 hours a day. They carry military assault rifles, and they are authorized to use absolute lethal force against any unauthorized intruders attempting to access the currency vaults. Derek Thorne was not merely orchestrating a simple burglary. He was coordinating a direct, aggressive assault on a highly classified Federal Reserve staging facility. He was preparing to lead heavily armed thugs directly into the jaws of a supreme federal stronghold. The trap was flawlessly designed, absolutely inescapable, and primed to snap shut. 72 hours passed with the agonizing slowness of a ticking bomb. During those 3 days, I watched Derek operate with a manic, terrifying efficiency. He spent hours locked in the guest room, making hushed phone calls and finalizing the logistics of his massive betrayal. He fed Brooke a steady diet of charming lies, assuring her that his sudden late-night meetings were simply the final hurdles before a massive venture capital breakthrough. That Friday night, Derek announced he had a mandatory after-hours dinner with an international investor. He kissed her cheek and drove away to coordinate a violent robbery. I waited exactly 2 hours after his departure. At 1:45, I walked into the living room where Brooke was curled up on the sofa, reading a book. I told her to put her coat on. I told her we needed to take a drive. She looked up at me, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. I did not raise my voice, nor did I offer room for negotiation. I simply told her that I had found something belonging to her mother, something deeply important regarding Patty and her old neighborhood, and I needed to show it to her right now. The mention of her mother was the only key capable of bypassing her resistance. Brooke sighed, setting her book aside with a mild groan of annoyance, and pulled a heavy wool coat over her shoulders. She followed me out to the driveway and climbed into the passenger seat of my heavy utility vehicle. The drive was cloaked in a thick, oppressive silence. I navigated the labyrinth of abandoned factories with practiced ease, turning down a narrow service road flanked by towering walls of corrugated metal and crumbling brick. I killed the headlights, letting the heavy vehicle roll silently through the dense shadows until we reached a secluded alleyway. I brought the vehicle to a halt and shifted the transmission into park. Brooke peered out her window, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She looked at the massive, dilapidated structure looming directly across the street from our concealed vantage point. It was Warehouse 42. I did not answer her immediately when she demanded to know why we were there. I reached into my thick leather briefcase resting on the center console and pulled out my silver iPad, the same device Derek had so eagerly photographed just 3 days prior. I tapped the screen, unlocking the device, and opened the encrypted software linked to the security network of Warehouse 42. I turned to my daughter, looking deeply into her confused, frightened eyes. I told her that the man she married was not a venture capitalist. I told her that his entire firm was a rented post office box and that he had lost his entire inheritance in a catastrophic financial gamble. I watched the blood drain completely from her face as I calmly explained that her husband was currently $2 million in debt to a violent loan shark syndicate. I told her that Derek had been systematically siphoning money from her floral boutique for the past 8 months, pushing her business toward a forced bankruptcy just to cover his massive hidden debts. Brooke opened her mouth to speak, to deny everything I was saying, to defend the man she loved. But the words died in her throat. She could see the unwavering, absolute certainty in my eyes. I held the glowing iPad out toward her. I told her that Derek had broken into my private study. I told her he had found a fabricated inventory manifest detailing $15 million in untraceable platinum stored inside the exact warehouse we were currently parked outside of. I explained that Derek had sold that fake information to his criminal creditors, brokering a heist to save his own life and secure a one-way ticket out of the country. Brooke stared at the screen, her breathing shallow and erratic. I told her that Warehouse 42 was not a scrapyard. I told her it was a highly classified federal armored transport hub used to stage central banking currency. I gently pressed the iPad into her trembling hands. I told her to watch the screen closely. I told her that within the next few minutes, she was going to watch her husband attempt to breach a federal stronghold. She was going to finally see the true monster hiding behind the mask. At exactly 12:14 in the morning, a pair of bright headlights suddenly swept across the cracked, uneven asphalt of the dark service road. Brooke let out a sharp, involuntary gasp of pure terror, her trembling fingers digging painfully into the soft leather of the armrest. A dark, unmarked cargo van rolled to a slow, menacing halt exactly 50 yards away from the heavy perimeter gates of the silent warehouse. The metal side door of the van slid open, and 3 distinct figures emerged into the stark infrared glare of my hidden security network. 2 of the men were massive, incredibly broad-shouldered thugs dressed in dark tactical combat gear, carrying heavy assault rifles. The third man was noticeably smaller, wearing a sleek, tailored designer suit. It was Derek. He was confidently holding a massive pair of heavy industrial bolt cutters. Brooke physically recoiled in her passenger seat, a broken sob violently ripping from her dry throat. I reached out and tapped the audio icon located on the bottom corner of the iPad screen, patching the sophisticated parabolic security microphones into the surround sound speakers of my parked vehicle. "We are going to quickly cut the main steel chain on the front perimeter gate," Derek instructed the armed men, his voice incredibly frantic and overwhelmingly greedy. "The old man is a complete, utter fool. He relies entirely on heavy steel padlocks and outdated deadbolts to protect his massive fortune. There is $15 million in pure, unregistered platinum sitting right behind those rusted steel doors, just waiting for us to casually walk in and take it. The pathetic old man genuinely thinks he is an absolute genius for hiding his vast fortune in a condemned, filthy scrapyard. Now cut the damn chain." We watched in stunned silence as the two heavily armed thugs moved forward, effortlessly snapping the thick rusted chain on the main perimeter gate. They pushed the massive groaning steel doors open and stepped directly into the dark, silent concrete courtyard. Derek followed closely behind them, a greedy, highly satisfied smirk clearly visible on his arrogant face in the infrared camera feed. He was absolutely convinced he had won. But the exact moment their heavy boots crossed the invisible threshold of the primary exterior loading dock, they unknowingly tripped the highly classified, silent federal motion sensors. Inside the dark armored control room, hidden deep within the facility, a barrage of red tactical alarms instantly began silently flashing. "Watch this, Brooke," I whispered softly. "Watch exactly what happens when a parasitic rat finally steps directly into the trap." Before Derek could even reach out to touch the rusted handle of the secondary loading bay door, the entire deserted industrial courtyard suddenly erupted into a blinding, chaotic explosion of brilliant, stark white light. Dozens of massive, high-intensity halogen floodlights, strategically mounted along the reinforced roof of the warehouse, flared to life simultaneously. Derek violently threw his hands up to shield his eyes, stumbling backward in absolute panic. The two heavily armed loan sharks instantly raised their tactical assault rifles, frantically scanning the blinding perimeter. But they were already completely, hopelessly surrounded. The massive, heavily armored bay doors of Warehouse 42 rapidly rolled upward with a deafening, mechanical roar. A heavily armored federal tactical unit, consisting of 12 highly trained operators dressed in full black tactical riot gear, rapidly poured out of the brightly lit interior staging ground. They moved with terrifying, synchronized military precision. "Federal agents, drop your weapons instantly and get flat on the ground. Do it right now!" A booming, highly distorted voice roared through a massive exterior bullhorn. The sheer, overwhelming display of absolute lethal force was entirely paralyzing. The two hardened syndicate loan sharks instantly recognized they were severely outgunned. They immediately dropped their heavy assault rifles onto the concrete and slowly lowered themselves to the ground, their hands laced tightly behind their heads. But Derek was completely frozen. He stood absolutely paralyzed in the center of the blinding courtyard, the heavy iron bolt cutters slipping limply from his trembling fingers. The brilliant, arrogant illusion he had spent years meticulously crafting was instantly, violently shattered. He looked frantically around the brightly lit courtyard, desperately searching for the massive pallets of unregistered platinum he had so greedily expected to find. Instead, he saw only heavily armored federal transport vehicles and the absolute devastating reality of his life-ending mistake. Two heavily armored federal agents rushed forward, violently grabbing Derek by the shoulders of his expensive, tailored suit and aggressively slamming him face-first down onto the cold, hard concrete. They aggressively wrenched his arms behind his back, securing his wrists with heavy steel handcuffs. "Derek Thorne, you are under arrest for the attempted breach of a highly classified Federal Reserve staging facility," the lead tactical operator barked loudly. "You are facing decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary. You have absolutely no right to remain silent." As the federal agents began marching the three handcuffed men toward the heavily armored transport vehicles, Derek suddenly stopped struggling. He slowly turned his bruised, terrified face toward the dark, secluded alleyway across the street. Even through the blinding glare of the massive halogen floodlights, he finally, agonizingly understood. He realized that the old, clueless scrap metal hoarder he had so arrogantly tried to manipulate and destroy had completely, utterly outsmarted him at every single turn. I slowly reached forward and turned on the bright headlights of my heavy utility vehicle, casting a long, illuminating beam directly across the cracked asphalt, briefly illuminating our faces through the windshield. Derek's eyes locked onto mine for one final, devastating second. I did not smile, I did not gloat, I simply stared back at him with the cold, unwavering, and absolute judgment of a father who had successfully protected his family from a dangerous, parasitic monster. Then, I shifted the truck into reverse, smoothly backed out of the dark alleyway, and drove away, leaving him to face the devastating, inescapable consequences of his own boundless greed. The ride back to our quiet, affluent suburb was peaceful. Brooke did not cry anymore. The suffocating, toxic illusion that had clouded her vision for years had been violently, permanently lifted. She leaned her head gently against my shoulder, finally safe, finally free, and finally understanding the true, unwavering depth of a father's love. The next morning, Mitchell Gallagher efficiently filed the necessary paperwork to permanently secure Brooke's remaining business assets and initiate the immediate, uncontested divorce proceedings. Derek Thorne never returned to our house. He was rapidly transferred to a highly secure federal holding facility, where he would remain for a very long time, entirely isolated from the family he had so callously tried to destroy. I poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and stepped out onto the back patio, breathing in the crisp, clean morning air. The storm had finally passed, the hunt was completely over, and as I looked out over the meticulously manicured lawn, I felt a deep, profound sense of absolute peace. I had kept my solemn promise to Patty, our daughter was safe, the parasite was eradicated, and justice had been served with cold, calculated, and devastating precision.